So positive news then for the Conservative Party, and in particular Rishi?
Well, I would say it's not bad news. It's broadly in line with what you would expect, historically speaking. It's been the case in the past that, on average, Conservative leaders have expected and seen a bounce of around about 4 or 5% in terms of the increase in Conservative vote when they've taken over. That was true for Boris Johnson taking over for Theresa May. It was true for Theresa May taking over from David Cameron. It wasn't true for Liz Truss, but she was exceptional in so many ways, and not least in that she enjoyed really no honeymoon period, although the circumstances around that were very different with the Queen's death. In terms of Rishi Sunak's personal ratings, he's around about neutral level, in the sense that as many people think he's doing a good job as think he's doing a bad job. And that's really a reflection of the fact that he remains relatively unknown. Only about 2/3 of people say they would recognise Rishi Sunak if they passed him in the street. And so there's a lot of room for him to be popular or indeed unpopular, depending on how things develop. But of course, it's early days. And the key question is, where will things go from here? He has a lot of important things to deal with coming down the track that similarly Liz Truss would have had to deal with. And it will be interesting to see how the public responds to those events in the polls.
It made me smile, Joe, because you said that, every new leader tends to get a 4 or 5% bounce in the polls for their party. I suppose if you're level pegging with your opponents, that's quite significant. But when you're 35 points behind, a 4 or 5% bounce in the polls is neither here nor there, really. I just wondered, with these figures which show that, Rishi Sunak has similar popularity levels to Keir Starmer from YouGov, and Redfield and Wilton show that. But the Conservatives still 30 points or so behind, according to all the polls, including a GBNews poll that we've done today. Does it show that however well Rishi Sunak does, that there may well be still no coming back for the Conservative Party before the next election?
It definitely illustrates the size of the mountain that the Conservatives have to climb if they're to do anything approaching winning the next general election. And it signifies that, yes, while leadership is important, there are many other things underlying the current position of the two main parties. And that includes, for instance, the fact that the Conservatives have lost their reputation for economic management, something they held for so long, and something that certainly Rishi Sunak will want to win back. And it illustrates the fact that whereas Rishi Sunak himself may not be particularly well known, and people may not have yet made up their minds on him, they certainly have, at least for now, very clear ideas about what they think of the Conservative Party more generally, and it's not a good picture. And you're right that a 4 or 5 point bounce when the parties are close together would change the overall story, but it really doesn't change the overall story now, which is if there were a general election tomorrow, Labour would expect a large majority. But as I say, the interesting question is not how Rishi Sunak does in his first week. It's how things develop in terms of the long-term trends over the next weeks and months, because the Conservatives have not been ahead in a published poll since December of last year. So it's perfectly possible they could go for a year or much longer without ever leading in the polls. And what that means for party morale, party discipline, party unity, even with another new leader, remains to be seen.
Joe, I just wondered very quickly, if you can, what might make a difference to these poll ratings, either positively or negatively, for the Conservatives? Because lots of our viewers have been contacting us to say, if the Conservatives get rid of the triple lock, I'm never going to vote Conservative again. On the other hand, we also get the feeling from lots of the viewers that if they do manage to sort out the dinghies coming over from France, that could give quite a sizable poll rating to the Conservatives. So what do you see as the key factors that will affect those poll ratings over the next year or so?
Well, I'm sure many of your viewers have their own particular areas of interest, but I can tell you quite categorically that simply dealing with dinghies coming over from France is not going to close that gap for the Conservatives by any means. The reason for that is that the only game in town, really, for public opinion is the cost of living crisis. More than 3/4 of people say that's the most important issue. And as I say, it's the reputation for economic competence that so often drives political support. And so I think what could have a huge impact, either positively or negatively, for the Conservatives and for Rishi Sunak specifically, will be how they deal with things such as rising prices, inflation, rising energy costs, and the cost of living generally. How that is dealt with over the next few weeks and months will determine the government's position far more than anything in other areas.